Hey everyone, Reborn 8 with R8 Gaming with another episode of Driver Side Chats. Today, I'm going to be talking about arcades. Now, I'm going to kind of show my age here probably, but talking about arcades because back in the day when you wanted to go play a game, you would go to an arcade. Now, what was an arcade, some might ask? Pretty much a place that had a bunch of stand-up games. Those are like large games that you see nowadays that, well, the games that you play on your computer, think about any game that you play on your computer. Think about just that one game being in a big box, about the size of a refrigerator, with a large screen, like a large TV screen, like CRT old style screen in it, with maybe a joystick and a couple of buttons. So the arcade was full of games like this. Centipede, there's a whole bunch of different arcade games back in the day that you can play on emulators nowadays, but back in the day, you would go to an arcade and usually it was 25 cents to play a game. And it was one of those things where it's kind of nostalgic to think about them nowadays, but you would go there with your friends. It was a place, if you liked a girl or whatever, you'd take her to, let's go to the arcade, It was a place that young kids hung out at. It was a hangout place. You'd hang out at the arcade. And I remember I loved the arcade. I loved going to the arcade, playing all the games, and there was one game, it was like I forgot the name of it, karate game. A game like Excite-A-Bike. There was like Frogger, Spy Hunter. And then there was, of course, like Tron. There's Star Wars games, But, looking at those, the only thing that if you've ever gone to PAX, they have this arcade room. That's what it was like. That arcade room has those old types of stand-up, big old games in it, and it brings back these memories. I remember last year when I went to PAX and I was playing some of these games, like Frogger and stuff, and it was just like these memories are just, it brings back these good times, The arcade it was good times at the arcade, you didn't get into fights, it was competitive, what was the first thing that you would do when you saw a game? What was always there looking at you? The first thing you went to a game was the high score. And sometimes you're like, I'm going to try to take that high score out, but most times it was like, it was so high, you didn't even want to mess with it, Playing Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man. But it was just fun to play games, but you wanted to try to get fairly good at a game because you wanted to get your 25 cents worth of it, If you're bad, you might have 3 chances, 3 deaths, and you're out, you had to pay again. Or you play double with your friends, so you put 2 quarters in and you would die, and then your friend would play his round and he would die or she would die. But arcades were a place of it was fun. It was a fun environment. It was a fun place to go to, the atmosphere, the memories. I still think about some of the games I would play with some of my friends back in the day, and even to this day, and I talk to them, it's like, remember when we went to the arcade? They'd be like, just laughing about these times, the bringing back those memories. And when we saw how it changed, how arcades, before you know it, there was like consoles out, the Commodore 64, when I lived through that time of seeing, the arcade dwindle, as people, Ataris and Nintendos and other things came out there that pulled the excitement you got from going to the arcade, the gaming, away from it, and it brought it into your house. So, I can go into that, and I will go into that, might as well. So as the arcade kind of diminished because the consoles came out, the Segas, the Ataris, just that ability, we're talking about before the Xbox, and PlayStation and everything. And even back in the day when the first PlayStation, you know. But we're talking about before then, when you had a cartridge that you would put into your console, and it was so cool because it brought like the arcade into your living room. You've had sleepovers with your friends, you know, if your friend had a Sega or something, or an Atari that had a bunch of games, cartridges, it's like, yeah, you'd be wanting to spend the night, you know, and what would you do all night long? You're playing on that game, you know, you're having fun, you're playing things like Pitfall, you know, that's the game that I remember, was playing the heck out of, you know, the Asp, the Snake, and, you know, the adventures that you would have, and the memories that you would have. But it was so cool that it started off in the arcade. You know, I almost look at like how gaming nowadays, like back in the days, it was like a community thing that you'd go to an arcade, and nowadays I look at where's that community? The community's still there, but it's crossed borders, it's across state lines, it's across continents even, you know, to where you look at the MMO, where you're playing with people from all over the world, all over the place, and they're not right next to you, but you're in a game with so many people. And I'll save the MMO to a different chat, you know. But the arcade in itself was such of a, I always think like if I had money, I'd love to just have an old arcade, you know. I remember watching Tron back in the day, you know, Flynn's Arcade. I even got an old shirt, you know, like that. I love that shirt. It's just, it reminds me of those old throwback 80 days, you know, the days that when you went to the arcade, you know, and how it's changed so much. But those of us that grew up in the 80s, you know, and remember those arcades, you know, we remember what the feelings that we got, the feelings that we had being in the arcade. You know, the smell, you know, here's a story. I was in an arcade once, and I remember this guy, you know, in the driving games, you would sit down and climb into the seat of a driving game, you know. Back in those days, there was a game called Pole Position, and there was a couple other driving games, and I got into the seat of this one, and I felt something on my rear, you know, like I sat on something. And it was a wallet, you know, and I'm a kid. I opened this wallet up, and it was full of 20s. It must have had like $120 in 20s. And, you know, I'm a kid, you know, my parents brought me up to be good, you know, so what did I do? I went to the guy that was the manager at the arcade and say, hey, there was somebody's wallet that they left. And I remember that guy came back, and he got his wallet. And, you know, it's one of those things like, you know, if somebody saves you from losing $120, you expect kind of a kickback or whatever. I didn't get shit. And I kind of laugh about it, you know. It's just like one of those things where, dude, what a punk, you know. It's like you could have, you know how many arcade games I could have played with $120, and I was the one that found it for you, and I was a truthful guy that gave it to the manager. So when you came back, you know, it was just this guy. He was older guy, you know. Of course, he was like I'm a little like a kid in elementary school. I forgot how old I was when this happened, but this guy was like, he was like a grown-up, you know, but he liked to go to the arcade, and he didn't even kick me back anything, man. I thought that kind of sucked, but, you know, whatever. You know, it's just a weird memory I have at the arcade, you know, and because I think about that. How many games could I have played with $120? That's a lot of games. A lot of games there. But no matter what, you know, people do what they do. It was fun, you know. I remember, I never skipped school to play games. Not that I remember, at least. But, yeah, I spent a lot of hours and a lot of money of my allowance at the arcade. I remember down the street they had a 7-Eleven that had several games in it, and I would get my weekly allowance and run down there. I'd always would say to one of my buddies that we'd go to the arcade, like with $20, and we'd go there all happy and leave all sad. Because we'd go there, you know, with that anticipation of, yeah, we're going to play games, but in time your money's going to run out. You can't play anymore, and you leave all sad. We get in fights and everything, and it was just one of those things, you know. It was that one of those bonding, well, it's like the love-hate relationships you get with your friends and odd things you do. But yeah, it was interesting. But in the end, you know, it was playing these games in the arcade, and sometimes it would, like Friday nights and Saturday nights, it would be like packed. You know, you had all sorts of age groups, from the young kids, the older adults, you know, and it's just like if you go online, Google arcades or something, you know, whatever Bing you use, and arcades of the 80s, you know, and I'm sure there's people with cameras. You'll see what I'm talking about. But the arcade, you know, it launched other things, you know. Without the arcade and the games in the arcades, we wouldn't have the games that we have now, you know, because everything is like an evolution, the process of everything, gaming. But there used to be arcades, people. And like I said, if you ever go to PAX, they have this game room set up called the arcade. Old school. You go in there and you can play stand-up games, pinball games. You can play those, and it's just fun. It's a time period and an era that's changed, but it's always cool to be in that flashback, I guess you could say, of times that are past and gone, but the memories and the way it made me feel, you know. And if you were around in those days and you went to the arcade, I'm sure you can understand what I'm talking about a bit. And if you weren't, you know, it's like your time that you're playing games now. In the future, you might look at it now, it's like, this is archaic, this is old, how we play games now. This is your arcade now. It's just one of those things I always think about when you're gaming, you know, the gaming, how it evolves, and how we, gaming, it's changed throughout the years. So look at the way you're playing your games now. Whether you're on a 720, 1080, 4K TV playing a game with the highest end graphics card right now, in time that's going to be ancient. And you're going to look back at how you're playing the game now, and this is your arcade, people. This is your arcade now that I used to have in the 80s. The younger generation, that what you're playing right now, this is your arcade. And cherish it and enjoy it. You know, take pictures of playing with your friends and having a good time so you guys can laugh about it when you're older. It was harder to come by a camera back in the days, so I mean, nowadays everything has a camera on it. So just cherish the memories that you have when you're playing now. Because always remember, what's new now is going to be old tomorrow. But that's pretty much it, people. I mean, it's the arcade, the feeling, how it makes you feel, how it made me feel. But knowing that it's gone now, the arcade is gone pretty much. It is history. It's a memory, but it's a good memory of gaming. That's pretty much all I have to say. I mean, this turned into more than I thought it was going to be, but as always, people, Reborn 8 with R8 Gaming, and always, brothers and sisters, game on.